TV isn't always right, where they show these guys going to buy these distressed properties in various parts of the country, and they say, oh yeah, this looks like a good one, and they can't get in, so they buy it, and then they get in and they say, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was going to be like this. And so you have to really know what you're doing, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, there's another type of phenomenon, or emotional stigma, and that's kind of paranormal activity in this type. And most jurisdictions, I don't think, require disclosure if a house is haunted or if ghosts have been seen. But older homes, like up in New England and into Canada, even where early 1800s, people died in their homes because there weren't hospitals and nursing homes to put your loved ones in. They just died at home. So it's not unusual to have a ghost type of thing in an older home. I was talking to one of my clients recently, and I was telling her about the show, and she said, oh, that's so common up where I am. I thought, okay. And she said that, it's not at all unusual for people to take pictures and have the ghosts captured on the camera. And she acted like it was no big deal. So it's interesting, but a lot of times just ghost hunters visit the property rather than serious buyers. But I'm sure you have some cases that you could talk about under this one, for sure.
Absolutely. There's a very famous case that everybody learns about in law school nowadays. It's a case that stemmed out of New York in 1991, and there was a buyer, Mr. Stembowski, who sued the seller, Miss Ackley, and her realtor for failure to disclose that her house was haunted. And so what happened is Mr. Stembowski put down a deposit on the house. So they ratified a contract. He put down the deposit. But then he found out not too long after that the house was haunted. So he wanted to cancel the contract, and Miss Ackley said, absolutely not. So he took the seller and her agent to court, and he claimed fraud. He said that it was fraudulent misrepresentation, that basically they duped him into signing this contract, and that the house wasn't worth what they said it was. So the initial court, the lower court, found that there was no disclosure obligation on the part of Miss Ackley or her agent. So the agent was fine. And then Mr. Stembowski appealed because he didn't like that decision. And the upper court found that prior to putting the house up for sale, the seller actually wrote about these ghosts and the activity that had happened in the house. It was actually, she said that it was people from the 18th century that haunted her house, a couple plus a third person that was a military person. But even though this information was all published in the local paper and even in Reader's Digest,
the
God. Buyers, yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yes, but the buyers weren't aware of it. Obviously, it was a different time, so Google wasn't as prominent. It didn't even exist yet. So even though the court did not rule that failure to disclose about the haunted house was fraudulent, it did actually allow the buyer out of the contract. However, where this gets a little bit misrepresented when the public talks about it is it sort of has been taken by some people to say, well, if the house is haunted, you have to disclose it. That's not quite what the court found here. In fact, it was sort of, at least the way it was taught to me, it's sort of viewed more as they weren't that far down the road in the contract. This lady could have relisted the house fairly easily, and the guy just didn't want the house. Let's just put everybody back where they started and get the house back on the market and put the earnest money deposit back in the potential buyer's pocket so he can move on. So it was more a case that came, and it was the court sort of finding the verdict that maybe the judges felt was fair as opposed to what was actually required by contract.
Yeah, that makes sense. And he got his money back, and he didn't have to worry about it down the road. And I understand that even the amazing Kreskin took a look at the house when it came back on the market. He was interested in it as well. So you never know who's going to come out of the woodwork, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, and then on top of that, apparently Miss Ackley, when she did sell the house, she was so frustrated by the whole thing that it was reported that she said to everybody she took the ghosts with her. She moved to Florida and took them with her. And there haven't been ghosts seen since.
Well, I guess that's one way of resolving the issue, but that's so funny.
So I
Oh,
guess maybe we need a new provision in our contracts that says, do the ghosts convey? I don't know.
I guess, yeah, we need to talk about the untouchable. The furnace is one thing, but the ghosts are quite another for sure. Otherworldly phenomenon. Does that convey or not? Yeah. But I don't know, some people think it's cool and other people not so much. So you never know. It could attract tourists, I guess, who would pay a
Definitely,
premium.
which could be good or bad depending.
You could help
Um,
pay
th-
the mortgage. Yeah.
yeah, there
For
was actually another case that came across my desk about 2 years ago. There was a group of attorneys that were circulating a question, and locally there was a man who had previously served in the military or some other, agency of our government, and he was renting an apartment. And it turns out that, and again, keep in mind this was several years ago, there was actually a list that the terrorist group ISIS published, and it had his name on the list as one of the people that they had a hit out on. So they
um,
actually had a bounty on these people's head, and it said, if you kill this man, you'll get, $500,000.
oh, geez.
So, yes, and it published his name and it published his address. So the question that circulated is, does the real estate agent have to disclose this when she lists the property? And it was really quite the debate. So what many of the attorneys concluded was, as a matter of, our state's law, maybe not. I have to say, as a matter of contract law, I saw it more in the light of how Mr. Dembowski tried to fight this case against Miss Ackley. I looked at it and said, well, if you don't disclose that, that's a fraudulent inducement to contract. You're basically tricking somebody into living in a building where somebody could literally come to the front door and shoot them thinking that they're somebody else.
Right. And if you don't notify ISIS or whoever's trying to get the person that he's moved, yeah, that could easily happen. I would not want to move forward on something like that. That's creepy. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So all the more reason to Google the property and definitely go to those websites that you mentioned as well.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But the last one that's really a stigmatized type of distressed property is a public stigma. And that really is more like well-known homes that were used in movies or on TV. They do get an increase in traffic as a result of fans who want to see the house or drive by. It's on the Hollywood star bus tour kind of thing. And this condition would require disclosure. I know that the house that was used to film the Brady Bunch TV show was recently purchased by HGTV and was remodeled, and they've had the remodel on the TV and everybody's been watching and stuff like that. But from the start, the project was really a gamble because the house is a 1950s split level ranch, and it was located 7 miles from the show's actual home at Paramount Studios. And it went on the market for about 1.885 million.
Wow.
And HGTV decided to make an offer, and NSYNC's Lance Bass also wanted to buy it because he wanted to preserve it. But the HGTV got paid $3.5 million for that property. So they needed to really make the money back by producing the TV show about doing the renovations and stuff. So you never know. And, like the Sharon Tate house has a public stigma, and that was 50 some years ago, but younger people wouldn't remember it. But certainly, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino movie, talks about that and has a different outcome at the end. But there's all kinds of different movie sites that can affect a stigma on a property. So let's talk a little bit about what a buyer should do before they buy a haunted house or any kind of house, really. But it's like a step-by-step summation of what we've been talking about. But obviously, checking the state's disclosure laws about the psychological impact on a stigmatized property, and check the seller's disclosures. And even if the seller doesn't have a form, if the state doesn't have a form, doesn't it make sense to ask the seller or the realtor who's representing the seller, is this property haunted? Is there a stigma attached to it? Because, some states don't require it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And don't forget the most important part, making friends with the ghosts that exist. You want to make sure that the new neighbors like you.
Well, I know you can log on to www.nolo.com, and you can find out what kind of disclosures are required for a particular state that you're interested in buying in. And like you said, ask the neighbors, the ones who are still living, not the ghosts. But don't ask specific, like the woman asked me, is the house haunted? Just say, what do you know about the house's history? Because if it goes back and has historic significance, it could be a very interesting thing to think about and to find out more about. Really, if someone lived in there, they may still be there from the 1700s. Who knows? And Googling the address is certainly an important part. But I know that from a real estate standpoint, houses that are stigmatized can sell for as much as 25% less, and sometimes they can stay on the market a lot longer because there's a smaller window of people who want to buy that type of property. So people want to take their time looking at things, and they may not. A lot of people say, "Ooh, I'm not going to live in something like that." So you never know. But you can come up on www.diedinhouse, that's diedinhouse.com. It's kind of like a Carfax for houses. And the guy who started it, Roy Condrey, he wondered, how would you know if there was a paranormal force inhabiting your home? And how could you tell if someone had died in it? So he was a software geek. So he developed this site which cross-references public records and other databases to find out who used to live in a particular address and whether or not they're still alive and if they died while living in the house. And it discloses information that the seller may not be required to disclose. Now, the other one that we talked about is called www.housecreep.com. Two brothers started that when they found that the bed bug registries were lacking in information about other scary things like murder and alleged hauntings, nearby grave sites, and other potential issues like weed growing, brothels, suicide, more. But, like you've been saying, Jessica, buyer beware, regardless of what you find, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
And I think
always ask the neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. And consult a real estate attorney like yourself for their advice on whether something needs to be disclosed. This is a more serious type of purchase. It's not just walk in and say, hey, sign here. You want to be sure that you do due diligence. And if you don't care about an old double homicide or a cult that once lived in the house or somebody died there, you can always change the home's address or alter the exterior look of the house or wait for years and hope that people forget. So, but anyway, this is enough to have a good conversation, and especially with Halloween so close, I appreciate your taking the time. But could you give people your email address and a website that they could contact you if they wanted to get more information? Maybe they need a champion title in a different part of the country, and you could share that with them.
Absolutely. So Champion Title, as you mentioned, does business in many, many states throughout the United States. Our website is www.championtitle.com. And if you need to get in touch with me directly, my email address is Jessica, Jessica, the letter Y for a last initial, at Case Lawyers. So it's KASE Lawyers, LAWYERS.com. And Debbie, thank you so much for having me today.
This was so much fun. I think this is going to get a lot of interest, and I'm going to boost it on my Facebook page to people in our area. But I know that there's people all over haunted houses are not indigenous just to one part of the country. They're all over everywhere. So thank you so much for joining me today. And if anybody listening has any questions, they can email me at moveorimprovewithdebbie@gmail.com. Thanks so much, Jessica.
Thank you, Debbie.